Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of CEP, welcome to our Professional Development Winter Series. This is the first in a series of four programs over the next 4 weeks. For those who don't know me, my name is Brendan Ryan. I'm a former teacher, principal and SEAL based in the southwest area of Victoria. As usual, can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands in which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Today, I am delivering from Wadawurrung country. The first topic of today's first session is the first 100 days as principal. So we're continuing the theme of health and wellbeing and leadership in our schools. Now, to start today's session, I'd like to hand over to Mark McKay, our Chief Executive, who will speak about some of the activities that CEP has been undertaking over recent weeks. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Brendan, and welcome everyone here present and everyone watching the recording. Teacher Education Partnership, we continue to support rural leaders and teachers in the area of professional development where we find a need or a gap. We run these sessions purely based on feedback we receive from principals and teachers across rural Victoria. And we have some interstate connections, of course. So that is where we focus on going forward. It's really important if you fill in the feedback information at the end of today's session, but please also feel welcome to have some input into our spring series, which will be in term 3 as those topics and areas are still being developed at this stage. So more than happy, really excited about today's session. So it's enough from me. I will hand back to Brendan, hopefully at this stage.
Now, Mark, I'm assuming you've handed over to me. I'm sorry, I can't hear a word. Just some housekeeping to start today's session. As per previous sessions, we will be recording today's session, and that will be available online from the CEP website as required. If you have any questions, please include them on the chat, and we'll endeavour to check out the questions and answer any of the questions that are presented during the day. And if we can't answer them today, we'll certainly follow those up online. At the end of each session, there's a survey, and I would encourage people to make sure that they do fill out the survey before they leave the session. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to our program manager, Morris Billy, who will introduce our guest speakers today. Over to you, Morris.
Thanks, Brendan, and lovely to see everybody back on screen again. Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guests today to share with us their stories around the first 100 days of being a principal, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of really interesting, exciting and diverse feedback from our 3 special guests today. First up, I want to introduce Nick Lovering, who's from Katherine High School in the Northern Territory. And it's fantastic to have Nick on board today. And I was just doing a little bit of reading about Nick's school a little earlier on, and it was good to see that, in fact, the Katherine High School actually covers a region and gets its students from an area larger than the state of Victoria. So if you can picture that in your mind about how far and wide the students from Katherine High School come from, that's quite amazing. And also, I think over 30 Indigenous clans are represented at the Katherine High School as well. So a real diversity and an inclusion situation there. So Nick, without further ado, I wanted to introduce you and welcome, and thanks for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks, Morris. And thank you to Mark and to Country Education Partnership for having me and the opportunity to share what I think is a pretty important presentation. I wish I had the opportunity to tap into something like this before I launched into my first principalship. And I suppose part of today, what I want to do is to share with you some of the mistakes that I made, but also some of the learnings that I gathered, and hopefully that might assist you and give you a couple of takeaways as you're continuing on, or if you are at the very start of your journey, hopefully it comes to you in a really timely fashion. I'm hoping that you can all see I've shared my screen and that's come up. Has that come up there for everyone?
Not yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
No worries, I'll try again.
Good to go, Nick.
How's that? Brilliant. Does that come out?
It has.
Yeah, great. The first topic I probably wanted to talk about is to understand your ego. It's pretty likely getting to the role of being a principal is probably a fairly significant life achievement for you. It was for me. It was 15 or 16 years of learning and different experiences, different schools, various teaching principal roles for me, assistant principal roles, and then to finally get picked, or well, there's a few failed applications as well, and a few knockbacks along the way. So for me, it was something that I'd always aspired to, and it's something that I was really keen to pursue. So finally achieving and getting the role of a principal is a big one. And so for me, it was about managing all of those emotions as I walked into the primary school in which I got my first principalship. I had about 28 teachers, 400 students, and it was a very dynamic school community. So managing that adjustment was really important. And, you know, the pressure that comes with the community sizing you up, you know, new things like your own office. Aaron, it might be a nice big office. You know, it might come with a new vehicle and a phone and all of those bits and pieces that you know, sometimes come with getting a new job. You really need to temper all of that excitement by placing yourself, what I would say is placing yourself as a learner, and really grounding yourself in your first initial period as a principal and saying, I'm here to listen and to learn. And that can be difficult because that's a little bit about being vulnerable. And for us blokes, especially starting as the leader of any organisation, you don't want to appear too vulnerable either. So there are ways in which we can do that, where we also can appear like we're in charge as well and we know what we're doing. So the first tip here is, I thought, was is make decisions. Absolutely, be decisive, not over decisive and too forceful, but I think it's really important to not get stuck early. You've been given the role, somebody or a panel has entrusted you with that position, so it's important that you're able to make decisions, but you also need to be prepared to work through your mistakes early as well. and to own them. And this can be a good way early on to share some of that vulnerability. So placing yourself as a learner, I'm here to listen and learn, but I am going to be decisive. I am going to make some calls early on, just little ones, because people will test you out as well. They'll come to you and see where your decision-making skills are at. So it's important that you can make some calls early, but you're also prepared to own mistakes if you make those as well. Having said that, when we're talking about decision making, and it's really important with your ego can lead you into promising big changes. And I think that's really important early, that you don't promise big changes. And when I'm talking about big changes, there's some real no-nos to stay away from, and there's some of them are obvious. Don't go changing the uniform or the school motto or anything like that. Think really carefully about curriculum direction and all of those sorts of things. You're going to probably see some things, some teaching and some practices and some pedagogy early that you may wish to change. But in your first 100 days, I would suggest that that's not the time to make those changes. And you'll also probably come into contact with some stakeholders within your school, and you'll probably learn about some relationships that you think, I need to tweak those or I need to adjust those at a later point. Within your first 100 days, I would say is not the time to fire the maintenance man or to tell the local footy club that you don't want them to come and do the handball competition on a Friday. Just roll with it early doors and watch and learn and think about ways in which you might be able to adjust and move forward later. So thinking about that, and if we were to probably just summarize this first section, is it's calm, decisive, listen, and resist the urge at this stage to solve, to save, and to smooth over. Okay, there will be things that come up that are bigger issues for you down the line. You need to take note of those early, with a key to, or with a point in your mind to say, I'm going to come back to those. And you know, it's not time to be writing 3-year explicit improvement agendas in your first 100 days. You've got to start building that knowledge and that information as you go. The next one I wanted to talk about is your own strengths. There's a reason why you've got the job, and there's some things that you should know about yourself that you know that you're pretty good at. And if you haven't listed those down, or if you haven't really tapped into those, then do it really quickly, because you need to amplify your strengths really early, and you need to put these on show for your staff really early. And when I say put them on show in a way that's calm and considered, but also too that place you in a place of positivity amongst your crew. So for me, my strengths have always been my ability to network, my ability to develop a rapport and seem approachable as a peer and as a fellow educator. You know, that means getting out and meeting your community, talking to your teachers, asking questions of them, and you know, listening to what's going on for them. The other one was context. I always was able to build a really clear vision of the context, and Maurice alluded to my context. It's fairly complex, so that was a working advantage for me. I'd been around in Katherine a long time, and for some of you maybe moving into your communities, you may be coming from the outside, so getting to learn the context is really important. The other thing that was really good, I really love doing, is I love this sort of stuff, sharing professional learning. So that's one of my strengths. And also too, is the purpose of education. I feel like I've spent a lot of time as an educator thinking about why we should educate young people and how we should go about it. So they're definitely the things that I know about myself that I bring to the role. and I need to amplify those. I have some glaring and quite, I'm pretty vulnerable in sharing some of the things that I'm not good at. I'm not good at the detail. I'm not good at the follow through. I love the big vision and I love the picture, but I love other people to enact it. I will quite often come up with an idea, land the idea, and then I'm moving on to the next thing. So when I activate my teams, I've got to be thinking really carefully about how I activate them and how I want my teams to do the work that we need to get done, knowing that there's bits that really just don't interest me. And sometimes you need to think about, do I need to work on this skill and improve it for myself? And yes, there is definitely things that I've had to work on to improve myself. But then there's things that I just really don't enjoy doing. And if I keep doing those, I'm going to be a really grumpy bugger. So it's better off to give it to someone else who can do those things and likes to do those things. So an example for me walking into the high school at Katherine as a primary school principal, the timetabling was something that I was never ever going to tackle. The timetable program is incredibly complex and it takes about 3 days to get to learn it. And I think you have to fly to Brisbane from the Northern Territory to do it. So I sent my head of campus to do that and I said, you're in charge of the timetable. So in bigger teams that can work quite well. Obviously, I've been a teaching principal in a one teacher school, and I know sometimes you've got to learn everything. But when you can, you need to understand that you've got a team around you and you need to activate them to pick up in the areas where you may wish to not work or they're not your strengths. The last one is, in this one, is to think about yourself as a coach. If coaching is not your a strength profile of yours currently, I would suggest that you work on making it so. Because if you don't understand how to coach and you don't understand how to question your way out of tricky situations, you'll get caught in the corridor saving the world. And that can be really tricky in your first 100 days as a principal. One of the things that happened to me early on was I set this approachability thing up. So everyone was popping in for a chat. By 5:30, I've done no work. I've had 4 45-minute conversations since the final bell, and I'm absolutely exhausted and talked out. And so I needed to find a way to manage my approachability and ways in which I can stop people from coming and dumping issues with me, which they will do when you're a new principal. There's a great book called The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. I really encourage you to read that book. I can't remember the fellow who wrote it just off the top of my head, but he talks about people giving you their monkeys, which is basically coming and dropping a problem with you at the end of the day. The way to not have people drop their monkeys with you is to be able to coach and to be able to ask the right questions. So I really encourage you to seek out a coaching course. I did Growth Coaching International. They've got a really strong model, so that really helped me. You can't do it all. And I sort of alluded to this. Work on the things as a principal that no one else can do. There's some things as a principal that you have to do. And then if you've got the team and you've got the talent, delegate the rest. That's so important. But just if you plan to micromanage as a principal, or if you have a tendency to micromanage, you need to think really carefully if you've got the energy levels for that. Luckily for me, I'm not a micromanager, but that comes with a whole range of other stuff. So I have a little saying that I say to myself, if I'm going to disconnect, I've got to protect. So there is work that I like to disconnect from and delegate. And when I do delegate that work, I just make sure that I protect the person that I delegate to. So if they go and do the work and they perhaps make a mistake or they do it in a way that requires adjustment or whatever, I'm protecting them in that work. So I'm there to support them. I'm there to mentor them. I'm there to coach if I need to. But if I've asked them to do a large piece of work or to do something that's really important for the school, and I've disconnected from me doing that work, and I've asked, say, one of my assistant principals or my head of campus to do that work, then I need to be there to protect them as well, and to pick them up and to support them if they need that along the way. But then also to really encourage them and build them, and to also identify for them what they're getting out of doing that work and how we might build that into their professional plan and their professional growth, and to explain to them why you have potentially chosen that work for them. So don't do it all. You'll just burn yourself out. You'll look like a micromanager, and there is so much to be gained by empowering the people around you and lifting them up, and giving them the opportunity to do that. Having said that, you might walk into a situation where you might have a long-term AP, or you might have a leadership team that might not come with you early on in the journey. That's where the 100 days is so important, to listen, learn and watch. And perhaps at the end of that 100 days, you might decide that, there's some opportunity for change within your leadership team. But I would say don't rush into that change, because giving yourself the 100 days means that you can learn about the strength profile of the people in your team. The last one I want to talk about is something that I've really struggled with. The consistent delivery of service as a principal to your people and to your teams. And the one thing that I try really hard to do now is to under-promise and over-deliver. And that's really, really important for me. Be careful what you commit to. And early on, it's so easy to commit to some big stuff. Just really, as I said, hold that, resist that urge to jump in and save, to overhaul, to say we need to do things different, to commit to different things. Teachers that are sometimes looking to create rapport with you will come and say, I don't like the way we do times tables in the morning. Have you seen Numeracy Ninjas? I wish we all did it, and it only costs $100 per kid per year, per term, per month. And all of a sudden you've lost the budget and all things have gone down the gurgler. So just be really careful with that sort of stuff. Even just classroom layout, classroom, it might be, you might have composite classes and straight classes and all of those sorts of things. Just remember, somebody's done the work before you, and there's reasons why certain things exist. So just be really careful not to jump in and change that. So have a narrow focus early, really think carefully, I'm going to operate within these parameters, and defer the big stuff. It's really important. The big stuff will come and you'll be able to walk into those spaces, and it's a bit like walking into big open spaces. Once you get into your principalship, the big stuff keeps coming. So just take your time, because the big focuses will come. And the last thing I'll say is just to continue to reflect. It's really important. The feedback loop as a principal stops, right? No one that's your APs, unless they're really tough and conditioned, they're not going to come in and say, Nick, you've stuffed that up, or that was a terrible presentation, or you've missed the mark here, or the feedback loop dries up. So you have to work really hard to be reflective. Find a friend or another principal, someone, invite them over, get some shadowing happening, or whatever you need to do. But just understand that you can't rely on the people that are working for you to provide you with feedback, because they've got to be really brave to be able to give you that feedback. So learn how to reflect yourself and learn how to tap into that feedback that you need. That's me. I hope there was a couple of takeaways there, and I hope that supports you in your early journey or your first 100 days as a principal.
Thanks, Nick. That was really, really interesting and really insightful. You know, full of your experiences, but also some really good tips there for people in that space. So we might have opportunities to you know, get some questions after we've heard from our presenters, and we'll have a bit of time at the end there. So if anyone's got those questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll get back to them. Just on your point about the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey book, I think the author is Ken Blanchard. So if people are looking for that book, that's from Ken Blanchard. So yeah, thanks, Nick. Our next speaker is Jane Langley from McArthur Primary School. I've been lucky enough to know Jane for quite some time, and in some of her incarnations from previous times. Jane's an absolute awesome person and someone that I've always admired and looked up to in her work. And she's going to share with us her journey at McArthur Primary School in the first 100 days. And I think she's had got some really interesting stories about leaky roofs and roofs that have collapsed and flooding and all sorts of things that happened within her first 100 days. So Jane, over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Morris, and thanks for the CEP for asking me to be part of today as well. Nick's story was just fantastic. There's so many alignments in there, but Nick, one very different one right from the start is it was never my aspiration to be a principal. This was never the journey that I thought that I was going to have. So as Morris said, I'm at McArthur Primary. So we're a really small primary school in southwest Victoria. So I'm a teaching principal of 33 students in this space. And in my journey to here, I've been fortunate to have lots and lots of different hats. So predominantly my background is primary teaching. I spent some time working in his education department as a drug education consultant, which is how I met Morris when I was doing some of that work. I also worked as a consultant, doing some work in restorative practices and behaviour management, and as a wellbeing leader, and then I ended up as a principal. So someone asked me to apply for or express an interest in the acting prin role here, and I initially said no. There's was in the middle of COVID, and there's never a great time to shift from your previous school, but I'm really pleased that I made that launch into this space. So the first 100 days. So I guess the first part for me was really thinking about the community that you decide to be part of and making sure that we were a good match. I think that's really important as you start that journey into a principal position. Is this the right space for you to be in? Are you a good match? There have been principal positions come up within, of course, you know, within the area, but having a look around, is that place the right match for me? Do our values align? Am I a great fit for that community? So for here, we're a farming community, we're a small community. I grew up in a small farming background, so I felt quite comfortable that we would be a good match. This photo that I've chosen to put up, I remember in my first few weeks here, I said to one of the students, what are you looking forward to doing this weekend? And he said, throwing tyres. And I said, I have no idea what that means. And because we're a dairy farm area, he talked about they were going home to do silage and to put the tyres out over top of the silage for the weekend. So there was a whole different lot of language that I needed to understand in becoming part of this farming community. So I think that's really, really important. If you're thinking about taking a principal role, really think about whether it is the right match for you in both ways. The other aspect is when you take on that role of being a principal in a school, just as Richard Branson is the face of Jetstar, you become the face of that school in that community. So I know for me, as a principal of a small school in a small country town, that I am the face of the community. So that means that I need to think about the way that I present myself out in the community as well. So it's very hard to be anonymous in a town such as this size or in a community. So I need to be personable, but I also need to be professional as well, because I consistently wear the hat of being the principal of McArthur Primary School wherever I go. So I'm very conscious of that. When I stepped into this role, I knew the strengths that Nick talked about, know what your strengths are. And one of the aspects that I value about my capabilities is my ability to build relationships built on trust with others. And one of the key strategies that I implement is around being personable and approachable and interested in people. And there's a really great document from the Search Institute. We know the importance of relationships that underpins the work that we do with our students, with our colleagues, with our parent community. But there's very little written around what specifically that looks like. So I really like this document because it talks specifically that one element is around being dependable, listening, believing in people, and being warm. So these were the aspects that I knew that I bought into being able to build up the trust with the people in the community that I was becoming part of. The other aspect for me was about my viewpoint around how I see leadership. So for me, a leadership role is around having horizontal relationships rather than vertical relationships. So coming into a leadership position where I don't see myself above the other people in the team that I work with, it's very much about everyone is valued for the contribution that they make to our team. And I think, Nick, you talked about that, making sure that you really value the people within your space. Here we're really a small team, but we're really what I call an eclectic team. So I, in my first 100 days, have consciously looked for, amplified, and valued each of the skills that each of my staff members brings to the team. But I also really valued how things had been done around here, because when you take on a new principal position in a new school, people can often be a little bit apprehensive about what you might change. And Nick talked about that, about not making many changes early. So I made it quite clear from the start that my role is not to come in and change the way that things have been done here, but to value what is already in place and strengthen that, and then put my own Jane Langley lens over top of that. So I think that's really important in those 100 days as well. Because I'm a teaching principal, I have this great privilege that I don't have to choose between being a principal or a classroom teacher. I get to be both. So that means that I get to model how I want good teaching practice or high quality teaching practice to look within our school environment. So that gives me that opportunity to influence and inspire those around me, which over time has slowly helped people reflect on their own practice. So again, we're working on the changes together. Being really conscious, I think, as Nick said, about when you're starting a new principal position, not to make big changes. So slow and gentle makes less of a splash. So just being very strategic about what are the small things that you can strengthen and change, and just take very small, narrow steps over what specifically you're going to work on. So for me, it's about quality over quantity and being very simple and precise in what it is that we're doing. So do a few things and do them really, really well. I'm a little bit like you, Nick. I'm a great big picture thinker, but I'm not so great at the details. So luckily there are people in our team who are great at the details, and we just verbalise that all the time. People know that's not my strength. And so we delegate to the people who are. As Maris, you said, it's about expecting the unexpected. So I know I've just got a couple more minutes before we hand over as well to Aaron. But in my very first day here, when I arrived, our amphitheatre out the front, we'd had heavy rains in the first overnight, and my amphitheatre was flooded with water. So my students couldn't come through from the car park into the front office. So that seems to have been the rhythm, Maris, of my 100 days in this time. I've dealt with replacing box guttering. I've had library roofs collapse because of hail damage. I've had flooded toilets. I've had very much water orientated issues. So I've learnt to work with the VSBA. I've learned to put in make safe reports. I've learnt to negotiate the quality of the carpet to replace that's been damaged in the corridor. These are not the things that I thought I'd be doing as a principal. So I needed to have a really wide variety of tools. One of the most unexpected things that I had to deal with was my fire water safety tanks. My fire water tanks had to have a 10-year compliance. And to complete that, I had to employ a team of divers from Melbourne to come and dive my water tanks to make sure that they were compliant and safe and write a report. So, you know, the tools to deal with the unexpected have continued to grow. In a small school, it can be like running another family because you have to do everything, as Nick said. You are it. There is no one else to delegate to. And so I think I'm just going to skip forward. It's really important that you take time to put down the load because it is a really, really busy job, and you are everything to everyone in this space. So having those boundaries around you, as Nick talked about, is really important to put those in place, but make sure you practice self-care and put the load down somewhere. For me, it's about, I have a strategy about halfway home, so I'm about 42 minutes from here, but I have a point where I put the luggage down halfway home and then pick it up again at the end of the start of the next day. So the key points, I guess, for me are about know the community you're choosing to be part of and that you're the face of the school. Value the relationships that are already there and the people that are in it. That's a typo. I'm sorry, Mark, I missed that one again. Expect the unexpected. Your toolkit needs to be well kitted out for the diversity of jobs, and boundaries can be tricky, so practice that self-care. But the rewards are endless, and you may not know what they are for years to come. I'm really conscious about the time, Morris, so I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Jane. That was awesome, as I knew it would be, and some really new things there, and some common things that you and Nick have spoken about now too as well. So that was fantastic. So thank you. I want to now introduce Aaron Smith from Pakenham Secondary College. I had a bit of a look at some of the stuff on the school's website, and what just interested me, and it's got nothing to do with 100 Days at Principal, is how they celebrate successes in a whole range of interesting things. There was stuff there around students who have excelled in dance, some that have excelled in chess, others that have excelled in baseball, which I just found really interesting and exciting that a school has that diversity and range of the kids' experiences and what they're able to do within their school. So, Aaron, without further ado, I'll introduce you, and thank you for joining us and sharing your story with us. We got Aaron there?
I have a feeling he's on mute. I've just requested him to unmute himself.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Can you hear me now, everyone?
Yep.
I was just saying, Morris, thank you for that introduction, and you've done your homework on our school, so well done on leading into our presentations this afternoon. And I thank Mark for the opportunity to be able to present as part of the Country Education Partnership Series this afternoon as well. I met Mark for the first time a couple of months back at an education summit, and I must admit I didn't know too much about the Country Education Partnership at the time. And from that meeting, I was asked to present this afternoon, and I've jumped at the opportunity. So I thank everyone involved for that opportunity today. And I just think with Nick and Jane's presentations as well, there's so much food for thought, and they've both spoken really well. I've enjoyed their presentations, so well done to both of my colleagues there as well. Before I start, a shout out to Madison. Thank you for your help with respect to bringing everything together this afternoon as well. All right, let's keep things moving, everyone, if that's okay. So a little bit about myself. I'm the principal of Pakenham Secondary College, and I've been the principal here for just over 12 months. Married with 2 kids, both at university, so very proud parent there. My interests include sport, as you can see from the screen there, some reading, socialising, and I do like old cars as well, and I'm doing up an older car at the moment. And don't hold it against me, but I'm a Carlton supporter for all those AFL supporters out there. Oh, I've got a round of applause there from Morris. Good to see. Good to see. I knew that there was something about you, Morris. A little bit about Pakenham Secondary College for those who might need a bit more information about our college. We're in the southeastern suburbs, about an hour's drive from Melbourne. Our motto there is to grow through connection, and I think that serves us well in terms of that sense of teamwork between families, students and staff in terms of getting the very best results for our students here at the college. We have a set of values here at the school to which schools I'm sure that we've heard from today, that would be something similar in terms of just guiding us all in our work. And as Morris has touched on, a couple of the areas that we're big at here at Pakenham Secondary College: performing arts, pathways and learning growth, sport and leadership. And our school's about 850 odd students, and we're about 50 years old, so we're well established in the local community. I'll keep moving, everyone. So a little bit about my journey. I've been working in education for nearly 30 years. Worked at a number of different schools and held a number of different positions in that time, ranging from curriculum to student management. Been an assistant principal at 3 different schools, a principal now at 2 different schools. So prior to my appointment at Pakenham Secondary College, I was the principal at Wheelers Hill Secondary College. And as you can see there from the PowerPoint, I've been a principal for some time. So when asked to reflect on my first 100 days of principal, I'd like to think that it was plain sailing, everyone, but it certainly wasn't the case in many ways. And again, I've reflected back on my first 100 days, which was some time ago, and there were certainly some things which I learned in those first 100 days, which I want to share with you this afternoon. It's a beautiful scene there, though, isn't it? It's magnificent. My appointments as the principal at Wheelers Hill, I was appointed from being an assistant principal at that college, and at Pakenham Secondary College, it was brand new, so I didn't know too much about the community at all. Both of those appointments bring different dynamics in terms of the actual role. And I see the demands on being a principal tied up in these 2 triangles, which if I've got some time at the end, I'll explain more. So if I forget, I'm happy for someone to remind me to explain that graphic. I'll come to that towards the end. Picking up on what Nick was saying before, there's a real sense of exhilaration in terms of being appointed as the principal, that real sense of excitement. You are very much the face of the college. You're leading your school community, and it's really affirming in terms of your leadership and your ability to win the job going through a selection process. So there is that real sense of excitement, but at the same time, there is that feeling of trepidation, that sense of so much to do. You are the ultimate decision maker in many ways. Will I make mistakes? And Nick spoke about that sense of vulnerability. And what are some of the first decisions or first areas that you need to lead within your school community? So you can feel a little bit overwhelmed during those first 100 days. And you're always coming back to, am I on track in terms of my leadership and I guess that improvement journey that you're wanting for your school community. Decision making, and we've touched on this in terms of the presentations that we've heard this afternoon. And I said earlier that the principal is often seen as the ultimate decision maker. So much of what we do within the school funnels to the top. But I think if you are as consultative as you need to be, it helps in terms of making really informed decisions. But at the same time, when decisions need to be made, you do need to make them. And it's sometimes hard to grapple with what needs to be done and when the right decisions need to be made. And during those first 100 days, I found that quite challenging. But I think to be able to lean on the expertise and experience of colleagues that you may know at your neighbouring schools, and I really value those connections that I've had with my colleagues in similar positions at other schools. You can really work with them and communicate with them and just work out what is the best decision at the right time if you've got some things that you need to talk through. So I really want to, I guess, encourage principal and class colleagues to find that time to speak with those in the position to just make sure that you're on the right track in terms of your decision making. Huge demands on your time, and again, from the presentations this afternoon, we've touched on that. I think sometimes members of our school community expect that we should know everything all of the time, and it's just not the case. And I think we need to be able to think through things as carefully and as slowly as we need to. And that talks to my next slide, which I'll get to shortly. But to be able to delegate, to be able to find that ability to push back at times and to just steer different things in different ways to your colleagues who have those different roles and responsibilities within your school. I think that's important, just to lessen those demands on your time at key moments at your school. And as I say, just to try and use that expertise of the colleagues in and around you can help to free up your schedule a little bit, but also overcome that feeling of feeling a little bit overwhelmed at times. As I said moments ago, I think sometimes there are people within your school who think that you should know everything all of the time on all matters because you are the principal. Well, it's impossible to do so. And I think sometimes we need to buy ourselves some time. That is, if there's certain questions or things which are asked of us, sometimes we just need to push back and say, well, look, I don't quite have the answer just now, but I'm willing to do some research and some homework to find out more. And I'd like the opportunity to get back to you. And I think by adopting that approach, it just allows us to be able to find solutions to any issues which come to our attention. And I think too, and again, this has been touched on this afternoon, just to build the capacity of others, to empower our colleagues that we're working with, and to really call on those connections from our colleagues can help to, I guess, be able to work through things as smoothly as what we need to, and come up with answers and solutions to questions and issues which might crop up and do crop up on a regular basis. The first 100 days, and I'll look at the first 100 days of my appointment here at Pakenham Secondary College. That's the most recent experience of me being the principal, I guess, in a new setting. And you do have that opportunity to set the tone and to set the agenda with your community. I think that's really important, that the agenda being set is not just being seen as coming from the principal. It needs to come from the work that you're doing with your school community. So being able to set the tone and being able to work through that in a really patient and considered way is really important. And as we've heard, the notion of building those trusting relationships, being able to play to your strengths, being approachable, knowing your school and your community will help you be able to set the tone and set that tone really positively with the people that you're working with, be that students, staff and families. And I think too, whilst you have some ideas in terms of how that agenda looks, you do need to understand your community really well, understand its needs, and then be prepared to take some time and be patient in terms of building on that agenda moving forward. Taking your time is really, really important, not rushing in, and to be really calm and considered in your approach. And I think too, what I've learned as a principal now at 2 different schools, and again, it's been touched on, being visible, being out and about, being seen as a part of the team. I've got a class, I'm in the classroom, I'm doing yard duties, I'm out and about at recess and lunch, and I'm also involved in so many different aspects of the school. As a principal, you are certainly seen as the broader team, and I think that's really important in terms of that visibility within the college. One of the things which I really grappled with in the first 100 days and continue to, it must be fair, is this notion of compliance and policy and documentation and our ability to work through things. And there's a long list of things that we need to work through as the principal. And I've got a couple of points here and or tips which I think are helpful. I think to be as resourceful as we can in this space, try and call on the expertise of colleagues who have worked in these areas in the past. what do they do in terms of providing a really effective and efficient approach to some of this work? Can you call on a colleague or two to get some support in terms of how things are done? I think to be able to reach out to our colleagues in that way can be a huge time saver, but it can also be affirming in terms of our work, just to get that reassurance that we're on track with some of this documentation, policy and compliance work. But sometimes the department will provide different ways forward in terms of getting this work done, but sometimes a quick phone call to a colleague can save you a lot of time in terms of our ability to work through this space. Expect the unexpected, that's been touched on. And I've got in my notes here that you might have your day really well set out in terms of what you might like to be able to work through in your diary. But the reality is that we do need to expect the unexpected. And both Nick and Jane have touched on that really well this afternoon. I think sometimes that can be a bit disconcerting because you go back to your diary and you think, gee, I should have been working on X, Y, and Z. But sometimes the reality is you just have to deal with things which come up at the time and work through those things as carefully and as successfully as you need to, because that's what is demanding of your time at that point. And I've got a bit of a saying here, which I've heard a colleague talk to, and that it mentions this notion of people by day and paper by night. And I think as principals, we spend a lot of time working with staff, students and families through the day, and then we catch up on our documentation at night because of the unexpected that we're dealing with on a fairly regular basis. I quite like that saying. It doesn't minimise our workload in any way, but I think it's a real reality of being a principal, that notion of people by day and paper by night. Try not to sweat the small stuff here. If you don't get to your diary in terms of working through those tasks, you can reprioritise and try and get to those tasks at a later stage. Sometimes easier said than done, but to try and work through things as calmly as you can. I'm conscious of time, Morris, so I'll quickly flick through these last couple. We've heard about coaching. In my first 100 days as principal, the Department of Education and Training in Victoria assigned me a coach, an experienced principal. I found that to be incredibly useful, really helpful. Someone that I could call on for support. And this whole notion of coaching, I'm a strong believer in. In fact, I'm looking to embark on introducing a coaching program here at Pakenham. So we're looking to do that in the weeks and months ahead to allow our principal class and indeed our leaders to embark on some coaching in terms of just understanding how we can further improve our performance and support one another. And one of the last ones, it's amazing being the principal in terms of what people share with you. I think they see you as the leader of the school, and I think, well, certainly in my experience, the things which are shared with you are quite different from being a regular member of staff. And staff, for example, sometimes just want someone in which to talk to, someone in which to lean on, to support, which might be things which are happening outside of school. And to be a really good listener and to put that time in with your colleagues, as per the example I've shared with you this afternoon, is so vital, just to be able to find that time for the people that you're working with. I'm rushing a little bit because I'm conscious of time, but if I can sum up, there's a few things there. Relationships, really, really important. Understanding the improvement agenda of the school community that you're working within. Try and be resourceful. Try not to sweat the small stuff. Often that's easier said than done. Finding that balance between work and what you do outside of work, because you do need that downtime. And call on support of your colleagues, as well as any other supports that you can call on to best get through your principalship role. And this diagram here, it talks to a top-down approach in terms of department expectation, all the way down to the principal here. But it also talks to everything funneling up from your school community up to the principal. So we're getting it from both ways in many ways. And that talks to some of the real demands of the job. Rewarding, but hard work. I think I'll leave it there, Morris. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Aaron. And as you mentioned, there was a lot of common themes amongst the three presentations there, and a lot of that stuff about knowing your community, understanding your community, but reaching out, supporting each other and looking after each other, which is something I might need to do with you, Aaron. Come down and we can discuss all the things that have gone wrong with the Carlton Footy Club and how we might fix it all. Might take quite some time. So I know we're pushed for time, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank Nick, Jane and Aaron for their amazing presentations this afternoon. They were awesome and so much to take from that. And Mark, I think I might just hand back to you, given time constraints, just to quickly talk about what's going to happen over the next few before we wrap up today.
Thanks, Morris. And just a reminder, everyone, if you have got time to do the survey in the chat, that would be awesome. Amazing presenters today, and next week is titled "The Slow Bleed on Principal Time." And what's totally coincidental but quite amazing is that Adam Wilson, who's from Stirling North Primary School in Port Augusta, South Australia, he actually is going to share with us how he breaks his principal journey up each year into 100 days at a time and sets himself goals and targets. And he finds that mentally easier to allow himself to cope with the rigors of the job. So that really fascinated and excited to hear about next week from Adam and Angela. So we're really excited about that. Yeah, just thank you to all our presenters today. Amazing. So back to you, Morris. You're on mute, Morris.
That was
Back on mute, Morris. You've double clicked.
just testing to see if everyone's still listening. Thanks, Mark, for that and the promotion of the next few weeks. It'll be really exciting. But I think just looking at the time, it'll back to Brendan just to wrap up for the day and finish us up. Brendan.
Thanks, Morris. I'd also like to thank our principals for their presentations. They were outstanding and some very important messages there today. I remind everybody that the session has been recorded, and you can go onto the website and listen to the session again. And I really do think that the session was so worthwhile, it needs to be promoted to schools throughout the CEP area, because there are some very significant messages there that are very worthwhile and that need to be digested. So thanks everybody for your contribution and involvement today. Please fill out the survey before you sign off, and hopefully we'll see you again next Wednesday afternoon. Thank you, everybody.